In early February of 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell took the stage amongst the American delegation of the UN to defend his hawk mentality over Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Just moments earlier, a large blue drape was strategically placed in the backdrop to conceal a hideous scene of horror and disgust, a sentiment to a past that had to be stifled for the time being. It seems that even the stalwart Powell wavered in hesitation at the thought of endorsing what was bound to be a messy war before an image of dead children, disemboweled animals, and the deafening silence of their anguished screams. While Winston Churchill once declared history is written by the victors, this is the story of how history was painted by the loser. This is Guernica. During the early 19th century, Spain found itself fraught with internal turmoil that only continued to snowball in the 20th century. Initially, the Second Republic and the centuries-old monarchy wrestled over power, and eventually the situation erupted into an all-out brawl between republicans, monarchists, communists, fascists, socialists, phalangists, and several other political offshoots. By 1936, a group of leftists, known as the Popular Front, won the election in the midst of a battle that was still raging. The progressive government imprisoned several right-wing military and political leaders that were suspected of planning a coup, and officers and troops were stationed at various Spanish colonies. Despite this handicap, the feared uprising was successful. From the ruins emerged vengeful nationalist dictator Francisco Franco and his allies Adolf Hitler from Nazi Germany, Benito Mussolini from Italy, and Antonio Salazar from Portugal. Spain became a playground for fascist militia, and the Civil War escalated into a global affair. Beyond the crisis in Iberia, the world was left licking its wounds from World War I, struggling to survive through the Great Depression, and fearing the outbreak of another world war. The face of the world was grim and serious, yet there was one man, a Spaniard in fact, who was laughing and prancing through it all: Pablo Picasso. Born in Malaga, Spain, Picasso was a child prodigy who grew into a beloved master. He gracefully evaded new obstacles that wiped out whole artistic communities, such as the advent of cameras, by working in abstraction. He did not simply adapt to a changing world, he flipped the canvas on its head and redefined it. To this day, Picasso is rightfully recognized as a genius, and unfortunately, he knew it. Following the debut of his Cubist piece, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, Picasso's career erupted into nothing short of superstardom. He painted million-dollar worlds where proportion, reason, politics, and pain were thrown out the window. In essence, he translated the glitz and glamour of his Gatsbyan lifestyle into his art. During the tumultuous period of the 1920s and 1930s, he bought lofty vacation homes on the French Riviera, attracted exotic young mistresses, and was the absentee head of Spain's most prestigious art institution, the Prado. His rose-colored life afforded him any luxury at the snap of his fingers, including the gift of blissful ignorance. But Picasso's perfect life soon began to join the rest of the world on Monday, April 26, 1937. There was a cloudless sky and glorious spring weather, recalls Luis Artenexia. The local market had just placed a sale on their sweets, the day was innocent, and life in Guernica moved at a leisurely pace. But 4:30 came all too soon for the quiet Basque town. Over the course of the next few hours, Guernica would erupt into a hellscape. Survivor accounts describe an unthinkable atrocity, scenes of bodies upon bodies of the dead and dying, lakes of blood, the putrid smell of burning flesh, and the practically instantaneous creation of a population of widows, orphans, and the homeless. The bloodshed, the barbarity, the complete obliteration. The Luftwaffe Condor Legion orchestrated the absolute success of Operation Rougen. Guernica was Franco's gateway to northern Spain. The fall of Guernica would subsequently bring forth the forfeit of Bilbao to the nationalist government, and the brunt of the already withering power of the incumbent Republican government. The North was predicted to fall from broken morale, not for the loss of any particularly crucial military resource. The nearest threat to the nationalist agenda was the armaments factory on the fringes of the town, which was left completely unscathed by the 100,000 pounds of incendiary bombs dropped on the village. No, the annihilation of Guernica was purely for intimidation. The morale of the various resistance groups against the Phalangists began to weaken, and as the fascist specter swarmed into historic Basque, so too did European attention. The Spanish Civil War had turned the country into a hotbed for tenacious young journalists. They had a summons for acting as a mouthpiece for their homelands and an eagerness to carve out a name for themselves. Prominent names such as Kim Philby and Noel Monks gained influence and clout through their reporting on Guernica. George Steer of the Times was one such correspondent, advocating for the truth about the Guernica raid, and battling against the vehement denial of responsibility by nationalist propagandists. Steer was seasoned in exposure journalism, as just 2 years prior to his commission to Spain, he wrote reports on the unethical use of mustard gas and the intentional destruction of Red Cross ambulances by the Italian army in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. Steele exposed the entire episode of Guernica as damning proof of Franco's unrelenting charge to bring Spain to heel, the dictator even going so far as to massacre innocent civilians. The influence of Steer's publication on European governments alone was incredible, but the change it brought forth with Picasso was nothing short of a miracle. The artist was described by friends as the least political man in the world, a title he claimed proudly, but upon reading about such unnecessary and unprecedented death, the painting of Guernica was all but faded. In Picasso's own words, the Spanish struggle is the fight of reaction against the people, against freedom. My whole life as an artist has been nothing more than a continuous struggle against reaction and the death of art. How could anybody think for a moment that I could be in agreement with reaction and death? In the panel on which I am working, which I shall call Guernica, and in all my recent works of art, I clearly express my abhorrence for the military caste which has sunk Spain in an ocean of pain and death. If not to be an honorable Spaniard, if not to be an honorable artist, then Picasso created Guernica as an act of honorable humanity. Picasso was commissioned by the now crumbling Republican government to create a piece for the 1937 World's Fair exhibition in Paris. His previous designs were scrapped on May 1, 1937, and the daunting undertaking of saving Guernica commenced. The Colossus stands at impressive 3.49 meters by 7.77 meters, with every inch bearing deliberate and meaningful detail. Much like the disaster of its namesake, the black and white piece told a tale of utter atrocity. From the staccato strokes of paint on the horse's torso placed to mimic static when printed on newspapers, to the illusion of stigmata in the deceased soldier's open palm, Guernica was the manifestation of Picasso's outrage against the pointless devastation at the hands of the nationalist government. Many shared this heated sentiment, and yet the painting's debut at the World's Fair exhibition was met with a lukewarm reaction from its anxiously expectant audience. Jerky, no reference to the bombing, but too excessively large, jagged. The mural was lambasted for being insensitive to the struggles of the working man by communist critics. The abstract cubism and lack of color was distasteful to many. The vague symbolism and lack of commentary from the artist was frustrating, and the most severe opponents to the piece held that the mural was a depressing and underwhelming insult to the tragedy. It seemed that aside from the panel's title, nothing in particular about the piece referenced the disaster, and the message was astoundingly bleak. But that's where the original reception was wrong. Guernica was in fact a narrative on the horrors of the air raid, and even more so, the now iconic painting is an allegory on the atrocities of all war. In a statement from art historian Patricia Failing, there was, of course, a great deal of argument about whether or not it was really as effective a political statement as it could have been, if it had been more accessible, if it had been more traditional, and also whether it was really the strongest artistic statement it could have been, if it weren't so tied up with a specific political agenda. The controversy about whether or not this particular painting could really be an effective political tool never leaves the painting. Picasso himself later on said that painting is not for decorating apartments, it has a much broader social importance. While it is sadly true the nationalist government would overtake Spain in April of 1939 and reign over the country until Franco's death in 1975, Picasso's Guernica matters as a steadfast testament to the mistakes of the past. The painting carries an ostensibly pessimistic air to it. After all, the artist quite literally painted the damage an evil man is able to commit. But even more than that, the scene beyond the panel of intense mourning is unknown to the viewer. What lies in that ambiguity is to the audience's discretion, which includes hope for the future, compassion for one another, and the promise to change for the better. That singular, devastating spring day inspired an immeasurably powerful and bittersweet victory. The story of Guernica extends so much farther beyond the bombing of a little Basque village, farther beyond an inspiring tale of an estranged expatriate's swan song to his dying country. The answer to the painting's enigma is its universality. It's a message to the world warning that we cannot afford to forget. The monstrosity of what occurred on April 26, 1937 is not exclusive to that day, but so long as there are people to stand in solidarity and remember more than the villains, tragedy is only momentary. Autocratic regimes expire, even the bitterest enemies can heal their rifts. Towns recoup and rebuild, and the triumph of Guernica, beyond its tragedy, is timeless.